These are the most disturbing crimes that happen in the Star Wars community, and as this video progresses, things will only keep getting worse. On August 11, 2025, President Donald Trump signed an executive order deploying National Guard troops to Washington, D.C. In the following days, the sight of uniformed soldiers patrolling the streets became more common, and most people just looked the other way. But one man had a different idea. His name was Sam O'Hara. Sam was walking his dog Lincoln near DuPont Circle in late August when he spotted a National Guard patrol making its way down 14th and Q Streets northwest. So he pulled out his phone, opened up his music app, and played the Imperial March from Star Wars, also known as Darth Vader's theme, at full volume, while following the National Guard. Now as Sam followed them, the soldiers just smiled and kept walking. Sam filmed the whole thing and posted the video on TikTok under the handle @FreeDC20009, racking up over 5 million views in weeks. Now in the days that followed, Sam continued filming these kinds of videos, following National Guard patrols while playing the Imperial March. And then on September 11, 2025, Sam was hanging out near Logan Circle when he spotted another National Guard patrol by 14th and R Streets northwest. And so, as he's been doing for weeks, he fell in behind them, recorded the encounter, and blared the Imperial March from his phone. This time, however, one particular soldier wasn't having any of it. His name was Sergeant Devon Beck. And unlike the previous soldiers who either ignored Sam or even smiled, Devon turned and warned Sam to stop following the patrol.
Contact Metro PD and they can come to you if that's what you want to do.
Now Sam didn't listen and continued following them anyway, and so Devon called the DC Metropolitan Police and 4 officers responded to the scene. They walked up to Sam, who at this point was standing on a public sidewalk filming on his phone, and handcuffed him. Sam would later recount that the cuffs were too tight, and when he complained, the officers simply ignored him. Now Sam was held there for around 15 to 20 minutes on suspicion of harassment before he was eventually released without charges. He then proceeded to upload the full video on his TikTok, which caused quite an uproar. One commenter said, "Sergeant Beck got his feelings hurt. If not Stormtrooper, why is Stormtrooper shaped?" Another called out the irony of the situation, saying, "Correct me if I'm misunderstanding, but did the guys who are supposed to be policing and keeping the city safe really call the police on you?" And Sam didn't just let the incident go either. He got in contact with the American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLU, a non-profit group that helps US citizens defend their individual and civil rights. And on October 23rd, the ACLU officially filed a federal civil rights lawsuit on his behalf in the US District Court for the District of Columbia. Now the defendants named in the lawsuit were the District of Columbia, Sergeant Devon Beck, and the 4 MPD officers involved: Officer J.M. Campbell, Tiffany Brown, Officer Reyes Benigno, and Alfonso Lopez Martinez. Now the lawsuit accused the officers of violating Sam's First Amendment rights, specifically that his use of Imperial March as a form of symbolic protest was protected speech, and that detaining him for it amounted to suppression of that speech. On top of that, he also criticized the ongoing military presence in DC, saying, "It was important to me not to normalize this dystopian occupation. Instead of respecting my right to protest, police officers handcuffed me so tightly my wrists were still marked and sore the next day. This shows the danger of deploying troops onto American streets. It puts all our basic rights at risk." Now as of today, the lawsuit remains pending in federal court, but while Sam was fighting for something he believed in, the next person was just doing her job, and in return she experienced the worst workday of her life. May 4th is generally regarded as Star Wars Day. It started as a fan-made celebration built around the pun, "May the 4th be with you." And over the years, it grew into something the entire community celebrates. Restaurants, shops, and venues also run promotions on this day, and their establishments are often decorated with Star Wars themed ornaments, and fans of the franchise wear costumes cosplaying their favorite characters. Now Coco Vanilla Galactic Cantina was a Star Wars themed restaurant located in Lethbridge, Alberta, and just like everyone else, they also held this celebration in high esteem. On May 4th, 2020, they organized a promotion to join in on the celebration. A 19-year-old woman who we'll name Anna was hired to stand outside the restaurant in full Imperial Stormtrooper armor, complete with a prop blaster toy. Now her job was to dance on the sidewalk in full costume to draw attention and attract customers. But 2 people who walked past saw the prop blaster and panicked, thinking it was a real weapon. So they called 911, and the Lethbridge Police Service dispatched multiple officers, including a whole tactical team, who arrived on scene with rifles drawn and moved towards her in formation. Now they ordered Anna to drop the gun and get on the ground. And upon seeing the officers, Anna dropped the prop blaster and raised her hands and knelt down, before the cops moved in and pushed her down face first into the pavement. Now when they removed her helmet, Anna could be heard crying as she lay there on the ground. Now her boss, who was standing outside the Coco Vanilla Galactic Cantina at this point, was also yelling at the cops to tell them that the gun she had on her was nothing but a toy.
Fantastic gun. It's
And despite wearing the thick Stormtrooper costume, Anna suffered a bloody lip, bruises, and scratches. Now once the officers realized that the blaster was just a toy prop, they released her without charges, of course. Now one bystander who was passing by when the cops crowded around Anna recorded the whole encounter and uploaded the video on social media, triggering intense backlash from the internet. One commenter, who was also a cop, fully sympathized with Anna, saying, "I'm a cop, and I understand getting the someone walking around with a rifle call immediately puts you in the headspace of this could be an active shooter. But when you get to the scene and see a Stormtrooper suit and Stormtrooper blaster, you should immediately dial it back." Now the owner of Coco Vanilla Galactic Cantina, Bradley Whalen, was also stunned by the whole thing. "When I came out, she was on her knees kneeling down on the ground. The police had already checked and seen that the gun was plastic, so they already knew that there wasn't any issue or a risk there." Now as the backlash continued to grow, the Lethbridge Police Service responded by defending their actions as appropriate, given the nature of the 911 calls. They claimed they simply acted according to protocol based on the information they'd received. One of the arresting officers also defended their actions by explaining that they only pinned her down because Anna did not comply with their orders right away. The person did not comply with the police verbal directions. Eventually they did after multiple repeated orders given by the police officers. Now responding to this, Bradley provided context as to why Anna didn't completely comply right away. He said he spoke to Anna after the police encounter, and she explained that it took a few seconds to comply because of the costume itself. He said she kept yelling at them that she couldn't kneel down, because in that Stormtrooper costume you can't even sit down. Like, it's impossible to sit down. It wasn't a matter of her not wanting to cooperate. Now William Shatner, best known for playing Captain Kirk in Star Trek and no stranger to the fandom himself, reposted the video 2 days after the incident happened, saying, "Sending my contempt this morning to the Leth Police of Alberta, Canada. NLPS Chief 1. Rifles drawn for a plastic toy cosplayer? Didn't comply right away? Are you blind, Chief? Watch the video to see how quickly she complied." Now the Alberta Serious Incident Response Team, which is an independent body that investigates serious incidents involving police in the province, also launched an investigation into the case, and after examining the circumstances, they concluded that no criminal charges were warranted against the officers. Their finding was the use of force was reasonable given the perceived threat at the time. Now on the other hand, Anna also didn't press any charges, even though she was just there to do a job, which resulted in a traumatic encounter for her. Speaking on this, her boss said, "The ironic thing is she's not even a Star Wars fan. Now I don't think we'll ever convince her to be one." Now at the very least, Anna's bruises healed eventually. This next case, however, is about losses that are even harder to recover from.
It was really a betrayal by someone who I had considered a friend for about 20 years.
Rancho Obi-Wan is the largest collection of Star Wars memorabilia on the planet. Its collection size is so large that in 2014, it earned a Guinness World Record for the largest private collection of its kind. And the man responsible for the collection was Steve Sansweet. It all started in 1977. Steve was working as a journalist at the Wall Street Journal when he stumbled upon a promotional mailer for an upcoming film. He'd fished it out of the garbage can after a coworker threw it away. It was for the original Star Wars, which is now known as A New Hope. He decided to keep that mailer, becoming the very first Star Wars memorabilia he'd ever collected. Now he became a fan of the franchise immediately after seeing the first film, saying, "Star Wars just awakened the kid in me again. It was like I can go into the toy store. I can buy stuff that as a kid I couldn't." And from there his collection just kept growing, and so did his love for the franchise. He became such a massive fan that he caught the attention of George Lucas himself, the creator of the Star Wars franchise. In 1996, Steve became the director of specialty marketing at Lucasfilm, the film production company behind the Star Wars franchise, and later became the head of content management and fan relations. Now 2 years later, in 1998, Steve bought a chicken ranch, which he repurposed to house his growing collection. Now this ranch was what later became known as Rancho Obi-Wan. By 2014, he'd amassed over 500,000 unique Star Wars items, including vintage action figures, movie props, costumes, and posters.
My name is Steve Sansweet, and we're here in Northern California in a small town named Petaluma at Rancho Obi-Wan, home of the world's largest Star Wars collection.
And as both head of content management and fan relations at Lucasfilm and an avid Star Wars memorabilia collector, Steve has cultivated relationships with many figures within the community. And one of those relationships was with a man named Carl Edward Cunningham. Now Carl was another fellow Star Wars fan and collector. He collected and sold rare items that many Star Wars memorabilia collectors dreamt of. Now Steve and Carl became good friends over the years. Not only did they bond over their love of Star Wars and memorabilia collecting, but they also genuinely got to know each other personally. Now in 2015, Carl offered to volunteer at Rancho Obi-Wan, since Carl knew a lot when it came to Star Wars, and he saw him as a reliable professional. Steve allowed it and gave him unrestricted access to his museum. Now Carl has built connections with other collectors in the Star Wars community too, and while many, including Steve, saw him as reliable, there was also something about the way he sold his items that seemed off.
No one can ever know you got this from me.
Carl would say this to his clients whenever he sold them something truly rare. Now the thought among his peers at the time was that Carl's other connections wouldn't like the idea of Carl offering a rare collectible to anyone other than themselves, so he had to be secretive. And once he got his hands on something valuable, he wouldn't sell it publicly. Instead, he'd simply get in touch with one of the most frequent buyers. Now one of them was a man named Zach Tan. In February 2017, Zach received a text from Carl saying,
I have a biggie, are you sitting down?
He was offering to sell him a rocket-firing Boba Fett prototype. To collectors, this was one of the rarest items you could get. It was manufactured in 1979 by Kenner, a toy brand company that sold licensed Star Wars merchandise. But before the Boba Fett action figure could be released to the public, a child choked on the metal Battlestar Galactica toy, which led to the child's parents suing the toy company. And this resulted in the rocket-firing Boba Fett figure being scrapped and replaced with a safer version, one that had no rocket firing feature. However, a few prototypes had already been manufactured, and many Kenner employees held on to those items. Now over the years, fans would collect these prototypes, dubbed by the community as Rocket Fets, and the price of one was valued at around $20,000. Now upon learning that he could own one of these rare collectibles, Zach paid Carl the asking price immediately, to make sure no one else would get the rare item first. Now at this point, Carl was still out of town, and promised he'd get the collectible to Zach once he got home. However, before he could even get his hands on the action figure, he received a Facebook message from a friend. The message contained a screenshot of a post from a forum site called Rebel Scum, a popular Star Wars collectible website, where a user came to report a stolen Rocket Fett, saying,
I've just discovered my prototype Rocket Fett was stolen from my Star Wars museum. The photo above was taken by a guest in the last 2 weeks, so the theft is recent. If anybody should hear anything about a Fett like this floating around, please contact me.
The author of the post was a man named Philip Weiss, another Star Wars collector who boasted a collection of over 20,000 Star Wars memorabilia. He was also the founder of the Rebel Scum website. Now upon seeing this post, Zach started wondering if the rocket in question was the same one he had just paid for, and to find out if Carl had anything to do with the theft, Zach reached out to Philip, who then confirmed what Zach had already suspected. Carl had sold him a stolen collectible, and what's worse is that after Zach shared a list of the items he'd bought from Carl over the years, Philip recognized many of them as his. However, he also noticed something else. A handful of the other things Carl had sold Zach were high-quality rare collectibles, and there was only one man he thought could have originally owned these items: Steve. And so immediately Philip and Zach reached out to Steve, and the Rancho Obi-Wan team started digging through the inventory and found something very distressing. Over 100 rare vintage items were missing, most of which were vintage action figures. In all, approximately $200,000 worth of memorabilia were lost from the museum, and it turned out that Carl had been stealing from Steve right under his nose for almost 2 years. Now Steve filed a report with the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department, and the police issued a warrant for Carl's arrest. But before they could actually arrest him, Carl surrendered on March 24, 2017, and was charged with 1 count of felony grand theft. He pleaded not guilty during his initial arraignment on that day. Now in April of that year, both Philip and Steve went public on the theft. Philip posted an update on his website, but refused to name the perpetrator, only stating that he'd been robbed by a trusted friend. However, Steve didn't hold back. On June 5, 2017, he uploaded a post on the museum website, sharing details about the robbery, while explicitly identifying Carl as the culprit, and not long after the article was released, it went viral within the Star Wars community. Many were shocked, especially those who personally knew Carl, and a lot of people started mocking him and making memes out of his pictures. But for Steve, this was a much more serious case. On June 6, 2017, The Guardian published an interview with Steve, where he spoke about the incident, saying,
It's a feeling of utter betrayal, that someone would stoop to this level. An alleged friend and confidant, someone I had invited to my house and shared meals with.
On September 17, 2017, Carl was sentenced to 12 months in Sonoma County Jail, 3 years of supervised probation, and was ordered to pay over $185,000 in restitution. And with the help of Philip, Zach, and others in the community, including Luke Skywalker and Chewbacca actors Mark Hamill and Peter Mayhew, Rancho Obi-Wan was able to recover around 100 of the stolen items. Now Steve's loss was eventually regained over time, but what was taken from this next person couldn't be recovered at all.
A striking example of what can happen when your picture appears on the World Wide Web.
On November 4th, 2002, a 14-year-old boy named Ghislain Gaza decided to stay after school at his high school in Trois-Rivières, Quebec. Once all the other kids left, he made his way to the school's television studio, picked up a golf ball retriever that was lying around, and started recording a video of himself. The video he ended up recording was 1 minute and 48 seconds long. He was swinging the golf ball retriever around like a weapon, imitating the double-bladed lightsaber moves of Darth Maul from the Phantom Menace. It was clumsy, enthusiastic, and completely harmless. He was a Star Wars fan just goofing around all by himself in an empty room. When he was done, he left the tape behind on a shelf in the studio and went home and completely forgot it was there. 5 months later, in April of 2003, a classmate named Jerome Laflamme found the tape stashed in the studio shelf. He watched it, and after finding the video amusing, he showed it to a friend, who converted the footage to a digital file. And from there it passed between classmates, until someone uploaded it to Kazaa, a popular file sharing network at the time, with the title
Jackass Star Wars Funny.wmv.
Within just 2 weeks, the video would go viral and spread to blogs, forums, and message boards across the internet. A blogger named Andy Bayo was one of the first people who shared the video widely. He was also the one who gave the video a name, which it is still known by today:
Star Wars Kid.
The video popularity only grew from there. It accumulated hundreds of millions of views even before YouTube existed, and at its peak it was the most watched internet video in history, garnering up to 900 million views. Now edited versions of the video started appearing as well. Game developer Brian Dupe, who worked on Star Wars games such as Star Wars Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast, and Star Wars Jedi Knight Jedi Academy, made an edit of the video, adding CGI lightsaber effects and sound, with the Duel of the Fates theme from Star Wars The Phantom Menace playing in the background. From there, more edits of the original Star Wars Kid video followed. It was also parodied by several shows, such as South Park and Arrested Development. Now, Ghislaine had become immensely popular, but his fame came with ridicule and harassment, because the more people watched the video, the more unbearable things became for Ghislaine at school. Classmates stood on cafeteria tables reenacting Ghislaine's moves in the video, while crowds of students laughed at him as he sat there and watched. Things got so bad for him that attending class became impossible, and the online world was equally as terrible to Ghislaine. The comment sections and forums that circulated the video were filled with mockery. The term cyberbullying didn't even exist at the time, yet Ghislaine had become a victim of it. By the end of the school year, Ghislaine's parents pulled him out of his high school, and he had to take his final exams in a psychiatric unit of a hospital after he was diagnosed with depression. The school even asked him not to return the following year, because of the negative publicity the case had generated around his name and the institution. Now, in July 2003, his family decided that they were finally going to do something about the harassment Ghislaine had been facing. They filed a lawsuit seeking $250,000 Canadian dollars, which is around 190,000 US dollars at the time, against the families of 4 classmates, named Michael Caron, Jerome Laflamme, Jean-Michel Rioult, and Francois Labat, who played a role in leaking and distributing the video. The lawsuit stated that
Ghislaine had to endure and still endures today harassment and derision from his high school classmates and the public at large, and that he will be under psychiatric care for an indefinite amount of time.
Now, the lawsuit also raised the concern that the stigma could follow him into adulthood, affecting his ability to continue his education, find employment, and live a normal life. Now, the case against Francois was dropped after Ghislaine's team acknowledged that his participation in spreading the video was only based on hearsay, and the remaining cases were scheduled to go to trial on April 10, 2006. But 3 days before the hearing date, both sides reached an out-of-court settlement for an undisclosed amount. On May 2003, Andy, the blogger who helped spread the video and gave his name, publicly defended Ghislaine on his blog, saying,
"Since 90% of the traffic to these videos is coming from gaming, technology, and Star Wars news websites, I'm guessing that most of you weren't any cooler in junior high school than this poor kid. All of you geeks, nerds, and dorks out there need to think twice before trashing one of our own."
He also organized a fundraiser along with another internet blogger named Jish Mukherjee, which raised $4,334 from 376 contributors, and they gave all the money to Ghislaine, along with a 30GB iPod, and a letter which said,
"In return for the countless hours of entertainment you've given us, and the hardships you've had to face, remember the internet loves you. May the force be with you, always."
Now, Ghislaine said nothing publicly for 10 years. He returned to school eventually, finished his senior year, and enrolled at McGill University, one of Canada's most prestigious institutions, where he earned degrees in both civil and common law, and later a master's in comparative law. Then, in May of 2013, a wave of high-profile deaths that were connected to cyberbullying made Ghislaine speak publicly for the first time. In an interview with the Quebec magazine L'Actualité, he broke the silence and addressed what had happened to him directly, saying,
"No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't ignore commenters telling me to leave the earth. I couldn't help but feel worthless, like my life wasn't worth living."
He hoped that talking about his experience would urge other victims to
overcome their shame and seek help.
He addressed other online victims, stating,
"You'll survive, you'll get through it, and you're not alone. You're surrounded by people who love you."
In 2022, Ghislaine then participated in a documentary produced by the National Film Board of Canada titled Star Wars Kid: The Rise of the Digital Shadows. In it, he returned to his former high school and sat in front of a class of students to talk about what happened to him.
en bon québécois, là, je lâche mon fou. Après quelques heures de travail bien tanné, je dis tiens, je déconne. Alors là, ça a donné la vidéo que vous connaissez.
The documentary also allowed Andy and Ghislaine to meet face to face, where Andy apologized for the role he played in the video circulation.
I have an enormous regret posting the video. I haven't talked to anybody about this. This is the first time, and I'm just profoundly sorry.
And after the documentary was taped, Ghislaine and Andy actually became good friends. And to this day, Ghislaine remains an advocate against cyberbullying. Now his trauma was undeniable, but the next victim was confronted personally by someone in a Darth Vader mask, pointing a weapon at her.
New this morning, surveillance pictures show an unusual robbery inside his Florida convenience store because the suspect is dressed as Darth Vader.
On November 22, 2015, the employees of 8till8, a convenience store south in Jacksonville Beach, Florida, were going about a regular Sunday afternoon when a man walked through the door at around 5:25 p.m. He was wearing a Darth Vader mask, a black t-shirt with prints that resembled Vader's chest armor, black pants, and light blue sneakers. His name was Jacob Jeremy Mercer, a 32-year-old man from Tonawanda, New York. Jacob was no stranger to the justice system, as he was a convicted felon who'd previously served a 17-month sentence at Florida State Prison, and just a few weeks prior, he'd also attempted to rob a separate store in Buffalo, New York, and got away.
That's 32-year-old Jacob Jeremy Mercer of North Tonawanda, and he's actually wanted in connection with a similar incident back here at home in Western New York.
His history meant that he was legally prohibited from owning or carrying a firearm, but that didn't stop him from holding what looked like a loaded silver handgun when he entered the 8till8 convenience store that day. He pointed it at the female clerk behind the counter and demanded that she hand over the cash from the register. Now the female clerk, whom we'll call Janice, didn't hand over anything. Instead, she actually fought and struggled with him until she got her hands on a nearby jar of salad dressing, which she then threw straight at Jacob's head. Now Janice's attack made him abandon the robbery attempt completely, and he ran out of the store immediately after, empty-handed. Now a witness who was standing outside the store at the time said that Jacob removed his mask as he was running back to his car, which revealed the damage the jar had done. He was heavily bleeding from cuts across his face, his forehead, nose, and cheeks. And when he got to his vehicle, he accelerated and ran straight through a stop sign and took a hard right onto 1st Street. Now Janice called the police immediately, and the store's surveillance cameras caught everything. But that wasn't the only thing they had on Jacob. The witness standing outside recognized his vehicle, his license plates, and Jacob himself. He provided a useful testimony saying,
"We were coming up here to buy a beer, and there was a guy standing at the corner, and the reason I recognized him was because he had a horseshoe in his nose."
Jacob was then apprehended at his friend's house, where he'd been hiding. The police didn't have to look far because it was only 3 blocks away from the convenience store, and when they found him, his face was still bleeding. Now they took him to a hospital first to have his facial wounds treated, before booking him into Duval County Jail. His handgun was also recovered, and the officers determined that the gun Jacob had used was fake. The Jacksonville Beach Police Department spoke to the press and made it clear that, although Jacob was carrying a fake firearm and the robbery had failed, it didn't make the incident any less dangerous at the moment, saying,
"Anybody could have walked in at the time, or what if someone else was already in the back of the store? There are so many scenarios that could have played out."
Now Janice never made a public statement, and it's not publicly known what became of Jacob after he was apprehended, other than the fact that he was not eligible for bond. But the next case had a similar ending. A man was apprehended, but the difference is that it started from something simple, a movie spoiler. On December 18, 2015, Star Wars The Force Awakens opened in theaters in the United States. Now at the time, people had been waiting for a decade for a new Star Wars movie. On top of that, it was a continuation of the original trilogy, which the films had explored since Return of the Jedi in 1983. Naturally, fans were excited. Many avoided finding out anything about the plot before, and spoiler warnings were everywhere all over the internet, and online communities had strict rules about them, warning their members not to post them. Now a high school student in Helena, Montana, who we'll be calling Michael, didn't quite understand how serious this was for Star Wars fans though. After seeing the movie, he started chatting with a friend from Facebook and casually revealed a plot detail from The Force Awakens. Now the person Michael was chatting with was Arthur Charles Roy, an 18-year-old who also lived in Helena. Now Arthur was a Star Wars fan, and like many others, wanted to watch The Force Awakens without knowing anything about it prior. So when Michael revealed that plot detail to Arthur on their chat, he didn't just get angry, he actually threatened him. He sent him a photo of himself holding a loaded Colt pistol. The gun had a hair trigger, which meant that it could be set off off by the slightest pull, and along with it was a message that made his intentions known.
I'm coming to find you.
Now Arthur said that he was going to come by Michael's school at around lunchtime the next day. So on the morning of December 19, 2015, Michael went to school, Helena's project for alternative learning, and told a resource officer about Arthur's threat. And they took the matter very seriously and the school was placed on lockdown. The cops were also alerted of the threat, and Arthur was later arrested that afternoon in an undisclosed location. He was brought before the Lewis and Clark County Justice Court 3 days later and charged with felony assault with a weapon. He invoked his right to counsel and said nothing during the hearing. Now Arthur's mother claimed that the gun his son had in his photo was a BB gun, although this was never confirmed to be the case. Arthur's bond was set at $10,000, and what became after him after December 2015 was never made public, but if he were found guilty, he would be facing up to 20 years in prison. For this next case, however, the person's life became broken for decades, all because he started in the series at such a young age.
Jake Lloyd, the actor known for playing the young Anakin Skywalker in 1999 Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace, was arrested in South Carolina last week.
In 1997, a 9-year-old kid from Fort Collins, Colorado, walked into an audition and competed against 3,000 other children for a single role. His name was Jake Lloyd, and the role was for a young Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace. Now George Lucas, the creator of the series, was directly involved in the casting, and after a process that stretched for nearly 2 years, Jake was chosen for the role. Producer Rick McCallum, who was present during the screen test at Skywalker Ranch, described what made Jake stand out, saying,
Jake has a very interesting personality. He's smart, mischievous, and loves anything mechanical. He had all the right qualities that George was looking for.
Now when The Phantom Menace hit theaters in 1999, Jake was 10 years old and was suddenly one of the most recognized and busiest child actors on the planet. He later described doing around 60 interviews in a single day at the height of the film's release.
TV commercials is they ask you to do things over and over and over again. What was
much like a press junket.
Yeah. Well, what was the worst?
Sit down in this chair again. Sit down in this chair again, you know?
His global fame didn't make things easy at school though. When he went back to Carmel, Indiana, his classmates made lightsaber sounds whenever they saw him in the hallway and relentlessly mocked him for being in the movie. Speaking on his experience, Jake said,
My entire school life was a living hell.
And fans and critics of the film were highly critical of Jake for his performance. One called him the worst child actor to ever be cast in a major role. And as a result of the mounting pressure and the overwhelming criticism, Jake retired from acting in 2001 at the age of 12. Now according to his mother, Liz Lloyd, Jake began showing signs of serious mental illness while he was in high school, saying,
He started talking about realities. He didn't know if he was in this reality or a different reality.
And his delusions got worse as he got older. By the time he was in college, he was experiencing both visual and auditory hallucinations, which were severe enough to affect his ability to function. Jake missed classes, his grades started to collapse, and eventually he dropped out of Columbia College Chicago after only a semester. His hallucinations got so bad that he was seeing people with black eyes following him wherever he went. At one point, Jake described having full imaginary conversations with Jon Stewart while watching The Daily Show. Now in 2008, Jake was formally diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. On top of that, he was also diagnosed with an additional complication that made treatment difficult to establish. Jake had what doctors call anosognosia, a symptom of severe mental illness where the brain itself cannot recognize that it is sick. And because of that condition, Jake believed that there was nothing wrong with him and that he didn't need either medication or a therapist. Now in 2009, Jake returned to Hollywood, but this time his work was all behind the camera. He worked as a production assistant for a short film titled Peer Pressure. Then in 2012, he was slated to direct a music video for actress and singer Mallory Lowe, which was supposed to star fellow Star Wars alumni Daniel Logan, who played a young Boba Fett on Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones. He also announced that he was directing a documentary about Tibetan refugees in India. Unfortunately, both projects fell through. After that, Jake completely stopped doing anything production related and would only make the headlines whenever he got in trouble with the law. In March 2015, Jake went to his mother's residence in Indianapolis, busted through the door, and started kicking her, yelling at her, and accusing her of ruining his life. Now Lisa called the police, but declined to press charges, saying that her son wasn't in control of himself and that he was off his medications. Now 3 months later, on June 17, 2015, Jake was driving through Charleston, South Carolina, when he ran a red light. A Charleston County deputy attempted to pull him over, but Jake simply didn't stop. And what followed was a high-speed chase across county lines and pulled in multiple law enforcement agencies. Carlton County deputies took over the pursuit as Jake crossed their border, and by this point, he was passing cars on a double yellow line and driving directly into oncoming traffic. Now the Walterboro police also joined in as the chase pushed onto Interstate 95 southbound, where Jake had reached speeds of over 100 miles per hour. It continued for approximately 25 miles before Jake finally lost control. His vehicle ran off the right side of the road, drove through a fence, and continued along a frontage road running alongside the interstate before finally slamming into a group of trees. Now Jake was immediately arrested at the scene, and the authorities claimed that he did not appear to be under the influence of drugs or alcohol. They were also unsure as to why Jake ran and tried to evade the police in the first place. Now he was charged with reckless driving without a license, failure to stop for police, and resisting arrest. His bail was set at $10,700 at his hearing on June 22nd. But strangely enough, his family didn't pay his bail, and they never explained why. Because of this, Jake sat in the Colleton County Detention Center for 10 months without a trial. And during that time, Lisa publicly revealed the schizophrenia diagnosis and told reporters that the jail officials weren't giving him his psychiatric medication. She also revealed that she'd fought to have him transferred to a psychiatric facility, but couldn't because there were no beds available. She then claimed that Jake refused to speak to her while he was being detained, saying,
"I tried to call him and he wouldn't talk to me, just flat out refused."
Now in April of 2016, after sitting at the detention center for 10 months, the state transferred Jake to a mental health facility, ruling that he would be better served by receiving mental care instead of getting a typical punishment. And while he was finally getting the help he needed, he was hit with another tragedy that only made the situation worse. In 2018, his younger sister, Madison, passed away in her sleep at 26 years old. Jake was severely affected by his sister's passing, and according to Lisa, it further deteriorated his mental health. In an effort to watch over him more closely, Lisa and Jake moved back to California, where the rest of their family was staying. However, in May of 2023, Jake suffered a complete psychotic break. He and Lisa were in a car together when he suddenly told her he wanted to stop. He turned the engine off in the middle of a 3-lane road in the middle lane while the traffic was moving around them, and when the police arrived and tried to talk to him, he responded in what his mother described as word salad because nothing he said actually made any sense. Jake was then taken to a hospital and placed in an inpatient mental health rehabilitation facility for an 18-month program. And by March 2024, Lisa spoke publicly about Jake's progress with Yahoo Entertainment, saying,
"Jake's actually getting so much better than he is. It's a big relief for me and the rest of his family. We're all just thrilled that he's doing as well as he is and that he's working really hard at it."
Now Jake himself spoke publicly in January of 2025, shortly after completing his 18-month stay and moving to a new center with more freedom, saying that he was feeling
pretty good considering these 20 years of time that have come to an end. "I can now accept taking on continued treatment and therapy and my meds. Everyone's been very supportive."
Jake will now have the opportunity to recover and reclaim his life, but the next person put his life on the line in an effort to protect others.
We are continuing to follow the latest developments from North Carolina, where 2 people have been killed in a shooting on the campus of the University of North Carolina, Charlotte.
Riley Howell grew up in Waynesville, a small mountain town tucked near the junction of the Blue Ridge and Great Smoky Mountains in North Carolina. Riley studied at the University of North Carolina and ran cross country, played soccer in high school, and participated in envirothons, competitions designed to raise environmental awareness. He was also an Army ROTC cadet with plans to serve in the military after graduation. And aside from all that, Riley was a huge fan of Star Wars, who had deep knowledge of the lore beyond what was shown in the films. On April 30th, 2019, Riley was in room 236 of the Woodford A. Kennedy building, sitting with around 60 other students enrolled in a liberal studies course called Science, Technology, and Society. It was the last day of classes, and the students were going through a final round of student presentations. A man named Tristan Andrew Terrell also arrived at the university that day. He used to be a student, but withdrew on February 14, 2019. Now, room 236 had 2 entrances, one at the front and one at the rear. At 5:40 p.m., Tristan burst into the room through the front entrance, smiled, and started shooting.
There's a shooter. So my first reaction was to find a place to hide.
Around 50 people rushed toward the back door at once, and the chaos caused a chair to fall in front of it. Now the students fell and climbed on top of each other in an effort to escape, but Riley didn't run for the back door. Instead, he ran towards Tristan and tackled him to the ground while shouting, "Go, go, go," to his classmates. Now these few seconds allowed his classmates to finally escape the classroom. At 5:44 p.m., a UNC Charlotte police officer ran into the room, disarmed Tristan, and placed him under arrest. Tristan fired a total of 17 rounds before it was all over. Riley, on the other hand, was still lying on the floor. He was shot 8 times and died on the spot.
Police say 21-year-old Riley Howell fought back when Tristan Terrell opened fire inside a classroom Tuesday. That gave officers time to capture the gunman.
Now, a fellow student, 19-year-old Ellis Parlier, was also killed in the attack, and 4 other students identified as Sean DeHart, Drew Pescaro, and Emily Haupt and Rami Al-Ramadan were injured. Now, when Police Chief Kara Putney addressed the press the following day, he talked about what Riley's actions meant for the outcome of that afternoon, saying,
"He took the fight to the asylum. Unfortunately, he had to give his life, but he saved lives doing so."
Now, Riley was buried on May 5th, 2019. He was given full military honors and an honor guard at Lake Junaluska, near his hometown of Waynesville. Around 2,000 people attended his funeral, which included family, friends, fellow UNC students, and other citizens who wanted to honor the fallen hero. Now, in the weeks after Riley's burial, he received a series of posthumous honors. He was awarded the ROTC Medal for Heroism, the Congressional Medal of Honor Society's Citizens Honors Award, and the Waynesville Police Department presented his family with a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star. The plaque that accompanied his medal read,
"It is with great honor and respect to present the American Hero Award posthumously to Riley C. Howell. Cadet Howell, with complete disregard for his personal safety, made a decision to stop an active shooter on his college campus."
And then on May 19th, Riley's family received another letter. This time it was from Lucasfilm. The letter expressed condolences as well as a surprise for the family. The letter read,
"As a small tribute, our story group has incorporated a reimagining of Riley's name as a character in the Star Wars galaxy."
The tribute appeared in the Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, the Visual Dictionary, which came out on December 20th, 2019. It introduced a character named Riley Howell, a Jedi Master and a historian of the Jedi Order. Now, Tristan, on the other hand, was charged with 2 counts of murder, 4 counts of attempted first-degree murder, and additional weapons charges. In September 2019, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, the strangest twist in the story, however, is that according to Tristan himself, he carried out the shooting to escape student loan debt. But while Riley passed away at school, the next victim was only steps away from her front door when she was attacked.
And now to the search for a shooter of a woman who was shot several times outside a home in Northwest Harris County. We've been following this story since our newscast at midday.
If you're a huge Star Wars fan living in the Houston area, there's a good chance you've come across the 501st Legion. They're a charity group where members dress up as characters from the Star Wars franchise. They show up at hospitals, do fundraisers, and community events. They also do it all for free, purely out of love for the films and in the service of the community. Now, a woman named Elizabeth Barraza, also known as Liz, was a member of this group. Liz was married to a man named Sergio Barraza, and together they joined the Houston chapter of the 501st Legion. Unlike most members who carried replica blasters or lightsabers to events, Liz carried something completely different. She was known for putting an Ewok stuffed toy in her holster. She didn't have any kids, but she loved helping them whenever she could, and as a member of the 501st Legion, she frequently volunteered at children's hospitals, dressed as Star Wars characters to brighten their days. On top of that, she also volunteered for the Peter Mayhew Foundation, an organization devoted to helping both adults and children in need. As far as anyone was concerned, no one had any conflicts with her, which made what eventually happened to her all the more baffling. On the evening of January 24th, 2019, Liz and Sergio walked around their neighborhood to put up signs. They were advertising a garage sale they were planning to put up the next morning, to raise money for a trip they were planning for the 5th anniversary. The next morning at around 6:30 AM, Liz and Sergio started setting up for the garage sale, after picking up her morning coffee at a nearby Starbucks. At 6:48 AM, Sergio left for work at a local Lowe's store, leaving Liz alone in the driveway. Then, only 4 minutes after Sergio left, a dark-colored Nissan Frontier drove slowly past their house. It then made a 3-point U-turn before parking one house down, just behind where Liz's car was. A long-haired man in a trench coat and a pair of boots, who I'll be calling John, stepped out of the vehicle and started walking up to Liz. And once he was face to face with her, she greeted him by saying,
"Good morning."
Just a few moments later, John drew a revolver and shot Liz 3 times at point-blank range. After she fell, he shot her one more time before running to the Nissan and driving off. Now, upon hearing the gunshot at around 6:55, all 3 of Liz's neighbors immediately contacted the police.
It was 3 gunshots real fast, one after the other. Then I'll wait a couple seconds, and then it was another gunshot.
And then, just 3 minutes later, Harris County deputies arrived to find Liz still lying in her driveway. She was promptly airlifted to the hospital.
On roads, Elizabeth Barraza was shot Friday outside of her home in the 11,100 block of Louetta. Today, the Harris County Sheriff's Office tells us Barraza has died.
Now, Liz struggled to hold on for as long as she could, but at 1:40 PM, nearly 7 hours after she was shot, Liz passed passed away. She was only 29 years old. In the days following Liz's death, the Harris County Sheriff's Office took over the investigation, and one of the first things they did was gather surveillance footage from doorbell cameras and home security systems from neighboring homes, and Liz's own place, which had captured the entire thing. The cameras saw John approaching, the shooting itself, and him fleeing the scene. Now the cameras also captured something that indicated the attack wasn't random. At 2 AM on the day Liz was murdered, John's Nissan Frontier was seen driving slowly through the neighborhood, indicating that he'd scoped the area beforehand. And after the authorities had taken Liz to the hospital, the same dark Nissan Frontier came back, driving slowly past the house before going away. The investigation also looked at everyone around Liz. One of the first people they questioned was Sergio, which was standard procedure, but the officers didn't have anything on Sergio and he was immediately cleared. Then the authorities turned to Pierce, other members of Liz's family, and virtually anyone else who'd crossed paths with her. They found nothing concrete, and no motive has ever been established, and the case would get so complicated that the authorities couldn't even say for certain whether the crime was random or intentional. However, to help find Liz's killer, the community program Crime Stoppers put up a $5,000 reward for any relevant information on the suspects, and later that number was raised to $20,000 with the help of Oscar Barraza Jr., Sergio's brother, and the Peter Mayhew Foundation, and then the reward was raised to $50,000 by January 22nd, 2022, on Liz's 3rd death anniversary. Now this family also launched the website Who Killed Liz Barraza to further shed light on the crime, and the case would get so much attention that it was even covered by several true crime shows like Crime Junkie, Dateline NBC, and dozens of local news stations. Despite all these efforts though, no suspect was ever found. In January 2024, on the 5th anniversary of her death, her father Robert Bob Newell Jr. stood in front of the press to announce that he believed his daughter was the victim of a murder for hire, although neither he or anyone else could explain why. Unfortunately, as of April 2026, the investigation still hasn't achieved anything, and the case remains open to this day. Unlike Liz though, who was killed by a stranger whose face no one has ever seen, the next victim had her life completely shattered by someone she trusted.
Clearly they are reporting a lot of this abuse to law enforcement, so they're not doing nothing, but there is a lot more they can do in terms of technology and in terms of complying with the Online Safety Act.
Anthony Pierce was born around 1973. He grew up in Wallasey in the Wirra borough of Merseyside, England. Now, not much is known of Anthony's early years, other than the fact that throughout his life, he struggled with anxiety, depression, and identity struggles. That and the fact that he was a huge Star Wars fan. Now, by the time Anthony was 50, he was working as a support worker. In his spare time, he interacted with like-minded people, particularly within the Star Wars community. And in 2021, he met a fellow Star Wars fanatic he developed a bond with. The only problem was that the other person wasn't even born until around 2010. Now the courts didn't reveal the girl's name in order to protect her, but for this video we'll call the girl Jane. Like Anthony, Jane loved Star Wars, so this became the common ground of their friendship. From 2022 to 2024, Anthony used their connection to Star Wars to deliberately and methodically make Jane trust him. And then with that trust, he took full advantage of her. At first he asked Jane to touch him and did the same to her. And then things escalated as Anthony started using toys. And from there, the interaction became even more intimate. And then without warning, Anthony suddenly stopped interacting with Jane altogether, and it was at this point that she started confiding in a school friend about everything Anthony did to her, and this led to the friend telling the teachers, who then contacted the authorities. In November 2024, the Merseyside police arrested Anthony and hit him with several charges, and by the time the case went to trial, Anthony had gone by a different name, Aria Pierce. He transitioned and now identified as a woman after the offenses were committed. Aria also denied all charges. The sentencing took place on November 25th, 2024, and Aria was convicted of all counts and sentenced to 15 years in prison, with a requirement to serve at least 10 years before any chance of parole. On top of that, the judge also imposed an additional year on license, which means that she will be placed under supervision after release, a lifelong restraining order prohibiting any contact with the victim, a lifetime registration on the offenders register, and an indefinite harm prevention order. As of the making of this video, Aria is incarcerated in a men's prison.